privilege to be able to greet you this morning and to say hello to each one on such a beautiful day as this. We are thankful and blessed. Always enjoy coming to this church because of the wonderful people here. This church has a special characteristic that some of them don't have. Some other churches. You know, we visit churches in different parts of the country, and we find a lot of churches where maybe 60% of the people in the church have white hair, and the rest of them, if it's not white, it's because they color it a little bit. But this church has a lot of people who are young people. We're thankful for each of you young youth of the church. I would guess if we would take an average of the age here, it might be around 30 or maybe less. I don't know for sure. Some of us who are on the other side maybe would unbalance the average a little bit, but we're glad to see each one of you here. The message I bring this morning and the last one, the last time I had the opportunity to speak here, I have a message, I believe that God will bless everyone. But I'm thinking especially of the young people today. Why? Because it may not seem possible to you, but I was young once too. I was once about your age. About the time a person is in his later teenage years, a person is about ready to fledge out and start flapping his own wings and leave the nest and go on their own, about to take your own course in life, about to leave the time when you do something because your parents are there and you kind of have to do it because that's what they expect of you. But the time comes when if you're going to keep on doing what's right, it's because you have decided, because you have made your decision to serve the Lord, because it is in your own heart to be faithful. That is an important moment in life. About the time I graduated from college, I spent quite a while thinking. I am a fifth generation in the Adventist church. I have never heard anything but this. I went to Adventist schools all my life. My parents, my grandparents, well, only my one grandfather was never a Christian. But everybody that surrounded me practically, all my life. But I had been baptized when I was 11 years old. And I always thought, well, God is good. But the time came when I began to think, is this really true? Is this really the right way? There are a lot of different ways, a lot of different viewpoints in life. Is this the right one? Just because they brought me up in it doesn't mean it's the right one. You have to make your own decision. Your parents' decision is no longer enough for you. Like we heard it said here recently, God doesn't have any grandchildren. What does that mean? That means you can't have a relationship with God through your parents. And God doesn't have any nieces or nephews or cousins or anything else. He only has one thing, that is children. If you have a relationship with God, it is because you have decided. Because it is your decision to have a personal relationship with God through His Word. Your parents can pray for you day and night. Your parents can weep over you. They can counsel you. They can encourage you. They can correct you. They cannot decide for you. They cannot make that decision that will make all the difference in the world. It is God's work in your heart. And your decision to open your heart to God. It is your decision to hear that voice. It is your decision to spend time with God in prayer and develop a personal relationship with God that will lead you through the stormy path of life. And I mean stormy, there will be storms. You maybe have been through some already, but I can assure you that if your life is beginning and you're young, There are going to be more ahead. There will be times of trouble. There will be times of temptation. There will be times of doubt. You will be assailed by time, maybe depression at times, maybe discouragement. Sometimes you'll say, here I've tried to serve God and look what's happened to me. Maybe all these things will happen to you sooner or later. They happen to all of us. Times like that come along. And yet, if we have made that decision, that one decision that decides everything, one decision that settles the issues for us. You know, we left our house to come to church this morning. What we had decided is to come to the All Nations Church. So when we left our driveway, we didn't turn left. We didn't have to sit there thinking, am I going to turn left or right? No, we turned right. We got out to the main road, and we didn't sit there thinking at the stop sign, no, I think we should go left or right. I don't know. Why? No, we knew we were going to turn right. And at each intersection, we knew which direction to go. Why? Because we had decided to go to church. And that overall decision guides every other decision you're going to make along the way. You don't have to stop at each little point along the way and think it over and try to decide which way to go. If you have decided to be faithful and follow God, if you have decided to make heaven your eternal home, if you have decided that your life is going to be sealed with Jesus, then you don't have to stop every time a temptation comes along. And Satan says, come on, let's go this way. And your friends say, let's do this or that. Every time a temptation comes along, you don't have to think that. You have said, I have decided to be faithful. I have decided to belong to God. My life belongs to Him. And throughout my life, this great decision that I have made will guide all the small decisions along the way. And it will help me. It will help you solve a lot of dilemmas and decisions. No, I don't have to decide whether I'm going to accept this job to work on Sabbath. I don't have to decide whether to marry this person who doesn't love God. I don't have to sit down and think it over whether I'm going to watch this entertainment or that entertainment. No, because I've decided to be faithful. I've decided to give my life to God. And that decision will save you from having to sit down in agony and anguish and think things over as you go along. Because I have decided to be faithful by God's grace. And we used a text last time, 2 Peter 1:16, which we're going to remember it right now if you'd like to look it up. 2 Peter 1, verse 16, where Peter says, we have not followed cunningly devised fables when we made known unto you the power and coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. Peter knows that some of the people who have heard his preaching are like the materialistic generation we live in today. They don't believe in supernatural things. They don't believe in anything beyond what you can see and feel and test. So they're not thinking about that. He knows a lot of people think that way in his generation, just the same as today. He says, this is not something we just made it up when we talked about the second coming of Jesus. We talked about the time the heavens are going to open. And Jesus is going to come descending on a cloud of glory. And millions of angels are going to be with him. And they're going to go out to the far ends of the earth. They're going to bring in those who are resurrected and the redeemed. They're going to gather them together. We're all going to go to heaven. He knows that some people think that's a fable. We have not followed cunningly devised fables, he said. We're talking about the future. The future. The end of the world seems like a fable to a lot of people. The second coming of Jesus seemed like an imaginary thing. Last time I had the privilege of preaching here, we talked about that. We talked about how the prophecies, we talked especially about Revelation chapter 13, and how this tremendous, awesome prophecy. Tells about the time the book of Daniel would be opened before the people of this world. How the prophecies of Daniel would show the second coming of Jesus. How the prophecies of time past give us faith to believe in the prophecies of the future. I was talking to a young man one time, and I said, and he was expressing a lot of doubt about God and things like that. And I said, aren't you impressed by the fact that 500 years before the time of Christ, it was all foretold what would happen, that there would be 4 nations, and after that the divided kingdoms, and after that the stone would come from the mountain and set up the kingdom of God. All these prophecies that have been fulfilled over the years and years and years, doesn't that impress you that it has to be true? Isn't prophecy an evidence for you that God is true and that we have not really followed fables when we believe that? He said, yeah, but what about it? What if that is true? I said, well, if the prophecy was fulfilled in the past, the part that is still in the future is going to happen too. Fulfillment of past prophecy gives us faith to believe that in the future it's going to happen too. What is going on is really going to go on. So that's an evidence for us of the second coming. But now there's another area of life in which a lot of people have doubts today, and that is the beginning of the earth. We talk about the second coming, we're talking about the end of time as we know it today. We're talking about the end of earth's history and the beginning of heaven's history. That's the second coming. But a lot of people today don't believe in the beginning either, the way the Bible tells about it. The Bible says that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In the beginning, the world was made out of the water. It came out. And a lot of people don't believe that now either. Both the end and the beginning of time are subject to a lot of doubt today. People believe that this is all fables, you know. When it says 6 days and when it says God created, He made the animals and He made the fish and the air and all, that's a lot of fables. We know it all came about by evolution. That's what a lot of people today believe. You know, Peter talked about that too. Look at 2 Peter chapter 3, right here in the same book. He also recognized that a lot of people didn't believe that. He said, let's start with verse 4, 2 Peter 3. And know this, that there shall come in the last days scoffers, walking after their own lusts, and saying, where is the promise of His coming? He talking about the scoffers who didn't believe in the second coming, but he says, for since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of creation. For this they are willingly ignorant. They willingly, that means because they want to. They are ignorant because of their desire to be ignorant. That by the word of God, the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of the water and in the water, whereby the world that then was, being overflowed with water, perished. He said there, people are willingly ignorant of the fact that God made the earth and that the flood came and destroyed it. These are things that today are openly scoffed at. That people they think it's some kind of a silly fable. So in both directions, there's a lot of doubt today. In both directions, people can doubt. And I want to we talked last time about the second coming and how the prophecy shows the truth of what we believe, what our church teaches about these things. I want to talk a little bit today about the beginning of things, about how we can believe that God really did make things as He said. Let's think a little bit about how that could have happened. You know, in 1859, Charles Darwin published a book called The Origin of the Species. People, before that time, a lot of people believed already that the Bible wasn't true. He wasn't the first one to put doubt about that. But people believed it, but they didn't have a good explanation for how it could have happened. But Darwin gave them what seemed to be a very logical explanation through evolution. How the survival of the fittest. How in the animal kingdom, animals struggle against each other, they kill each other, and that the ones that are strongest, the ones that are best adapted, the fittest, are the ones that survive. And those are the weak ones are the ones that are killed. And as time goes by, the strong ones survive and they begin to reproduce, and therefore, through this plan, the weak begin to die out. They don't survive in order to reproduce. And this is how all of life has come about. All of life, from beginning with a molecule, beginning with a small one-celled animal, then this developed into multi-celled animals, and this began to develop into crustaceans and fish, and pretty soon they came out on dry land, and they began to crawl around, and then one day they learned to fly, and one day they learned to walk, and as life went on through the survival of the fittest, all of life, all the different millions of species and things have come about. This is the popular explanation of how these things have taken place, of how these things could happen. Now, I would like to say that I believe in survival of the fittest. I think it is a true principle. In other words, it is really true that the strong in nature are the ones that survive. If you're thinking of where there are a lot of lions, and you think of where there are some antelopes, which is the antelope is going to get eaten? What's the weaker one? The slower one? The one that couldn't get away? The strong ones that can run away and they survive. That principle is true. It happens. But is that an adequate explanation for everything that we see in life? Is that an explanation for how everything really is today? Can we trust that as an explanation? You know, Charles Darwin lived back in, as I said, well, his main discoveries were made when he left in the year 1844 in a ship called the Beagle. And they made a round-the-world journey, which took about 2 years going around. They would stop in different places and make observations. And Darwin was the biologist employed by the British government to go with his ship called the Beagle. And he was a very good observer. And he observed things, especially in the Galapagos Island, off of the coast of Ecuador in South America. And this is where he came up with his ideas, thinking over these animals that I see here in the island are similar to the ones in the coast, but they're also somewhat different. And as he thought about this, he thought, well, the similarities must mean that some animals from the coast came over here. That's why they're similar. Well, why are they different? Because the conditions here in the islands are different. There were iguanas, for instance. He studied the iguanas in the Galapagos Islands. These iguanas in the coast look a lot like these ones. They're the same color and thing, but the iguanas in the coast eat insects. But these ones here they swim down to the bottom of the ocean and they eat seaweeds. The iguanas in the coast couldn't possibly do that. How did these ones, why are they different? Well, because when they came here, they could not get insects to eat, so they didn't survive. But maybe one or two of them were so hungry, he started to eat some plants from the sea, and over time, the strong ones survived, and those who were able to learned to swim, and they learned to dive, and they learned to go down in the ocean. And over time, the few that survived were the ones that propagated here, and that's how. And he explained it this way. Now, this seems logical. It seemed like a logical explanation how some animals can survive as conditions change. Climate change is going on right now. climate change is nothing new. It's happened over thousands of years. Climate has been changing different times. In the animals that are able to survive the conditions of drought or heat or water or cold are the ones that are able to go on. And some species die out and some don't. Some survive. And these things are the ones that have made the difference as time goes on. That's what Darwin taught. And there's a lot of evidence to believe that this has happened to some extent. Darwin believed all of this. And this is what he taught. But Darwin thought back about the very beginning of things, how things could have started. How did the very first life happen? A man, a Dutchman named Leeuwenhoek, had discovered how to use ground glass to make microscopes. He used a microscope and he was able to see for the first time microorganisms, little one-celled animals that are too small to be seen by the natural eye. He used his microscope to be able to see in a drop of water that looks like nothing, but you get it from the pond or from outside somewhere. But there are hundreds of little animals swimming around in there. So he made the discovery of one-celled animals. And Darwin was aware of this, so he thought, well, the first life must have been one-celled animals that came out of, well, he didn't really try to explain it. But he said, I know that science is still in its infancy. It's growing, it's going to go forward. And in time, things will be easier. And we will be able to make more discoveries and we'll prove that my theories are right. Well, it happens that in 1936, the electronic microscope was invented. That made it possible to see things were a lot smaller than what the optical microscope is able to see. With the optical microscope, they could see things down to maybe half a micron. Now, a micron is a millionth of a meter. That is a thousandth of a millimeter. Think of a millimeter. You don't have the idea how big it is, more or less, a millimeter? Well, a thousandth of a millimeter, that's a micron. Now, most microbes, or most one-celled animals, are between 3 and 5 microns in size. There's some bigger and some smaller than that. But most of them are about that size. But there's a limit to what the optical microscope can see, because the light, the length of the light waves, light is different colors because it has different wavelengths. And red is the short wavelength, and purple or dark blue is the long wavelength of light. But there are wavelengths of light that are too small to be seen by our eyes, and some are too large. They are known as by different names, but the thing is, we can only see within a certain wavelengths of light. So even if you have the strongest lens you can get in your microscope, you're not going to see something smaller than the shortest wavelength of light, because our eye just can't see that. But when they invented the electron microscope in 1936, they were able to see things much smaller than they'd ever seen before. And what an amazement there was when they turned this onto the one-celled animals. Because now they were able to discover that these one-celled animals are not simple little things that they had imagined. They had imagined a one-celled animal is extremely simple life. There is nothing complicated or difficult about it. But when they began using electron microscopes, they discovered that the one-celled animal is extremely complex. There is no life smaller or below this in the evolutionary chain. Let's suppose that we accept evolution. There's nothing below that. One-celled animals. As Darwin thought that time would prove his theory to be right, and that they would be able to see how the one-celled animal could have come out of nothing, but the discovery of the electronic microscope has made his theory much more difficult, because it has shown the extreme complexity of even the smallest organism. The one-celled animal, he has what is called cytoplasm. It's a liquid that is enclosed in a little membrane. It's a double membrane. Double walls go around it. And this membrane, as we think about it, it looks like, well, you could just get a little piece of plastic or something like that and reproduce it. No, you can't. Why? Because this membrane that encloses the cell, the one-celled animal, is very intelligent. It has a very, very important job to do. It holds all the cytoplasm inside, doesn't let it go out. But the cell produces a lot of substances that the body needs. The hormones and the different things that the body needs are produced in our cells. And the cell wall allows these things to go out, but it does not allow the good stuff in there to go out. Cell metabolism, the cell functioning, produces waste products. And the walls of the cell allow the waste products to go out. They know. In the liquid surrounding the cell, there are things that could damage the cell. The cell membrane does not allow these things to come in. But the cell needs certain substances as its food and its production, and the membrane allows these things to come in. So the cell membrane is a very intelligent policeman. He says, you can go out, you can't go, you can go, you can go. Come in, you come in. You can't come in because something that looks so simple. It looks like a simple membrane, but it's a double-walled membrane that is essential to the integrity of the cell. Now, they discovered this. Once they were able to see with a microscope, electron microscope, they were able to see much smaller than they had been able to see before. They had seen before, through an optical microscope, they had seen kind of little black specks in the cells. But they didn't know, they thought there may be kind of some trash or something in there, they didn't know what. But as they began to study more closely, they could see what these things were. They could begin to see these were organs. These were organs in the cell that have different function, producing energy for the cell to operate. They control the cell's function in different ways. These are organs within the cell that are essential to the cell's functioning. A cell is extremely complicated, extremely complex in all that it does. These are things that go on in the cell. And let's think of a cell. Now let's talk about, trying to be a little more specific in all of this. I'm going to think of a cell that is part of our pancreas. We don't often think of our pancreas. Think of our stomach more often, probably is the organ we think about the most. When it becomes the meal time and the stomach says, I would like to be fed now, we begin to think about that quite a bit. But we don't think of our pancreas very often. And yet it's essential. It's essential. Every time you eat sugar, the pancreas comes into operation, because otherwise the amount of sugar in your bloodstream would kill you. The pancreas is on the job, and it regulates the sugar glucose level in the blood. It's there. Some people over time have discovered that if we abuse it and it gives up, they can get in trouble, and that's called diabetes. It's because the pancreas has given up and not regulating sugar glucose levels in our blood the way it's designed to do originally. This is part of it. But let's think for a moment how some of this functions. Let's think of a cell in the pancreas. In the part of the pancreas, not the whole organ, but part of it is dedicated to producing what is called insulin. Most of us have heard the word insulin, because that is what increases the intake of glucose into the cells and decreases the amount of glucose in the blood, which could be very harmful. Let's think of this one of these cells. Now, the cell has in the very center a control center. It is called the nucleus of the cell. The nucleus of the cell is the command center. It is what regulates, it organizes, it decides, let's say, what the cell is going to do. Now let's think of this cell in the pancreas that is in charge of producing insulin. The cell senses that in the bloodstream that is going around, the amount of glucose has increased because we ate a 24-ounce glass of soda, and we took in 64 grams of sugar. And this is absorbed into our body, into our bloodstream. And blood sugar goes up quickly. Alarm bells start ringing in our body. This person is going to die very soon if we don't do something about this, because there's so much sugar here. Now, the nucleus of these little cells has to know that the amount of glucose in the blood has gone up. I say glucose, this is one of the number of kinds of sugar. This is one kind of sugar. The amount of glucose in the blood has gone up. Scientists discuss quite a bit how the nucleus knows. How does the cell know? What's the mechanism by which it gets the alarm? I'm not able to go into that, not only because I don't have time, but I don't really know for sure. But the cell knows. The nucleus finds out. Now, the nucleus is made up of a lot of, it's like a filing cabinet, file. You know, a filing cabinet has drawers. In each drawer, there are folders inside, file folders inside. Well, the nucleus has a lot of chromosomes. The chromosomes are packed with genes. And the genes are like the chromosome as a file drawer, and the genes are the individual file folders inside. Each gene has a huge amount of information. But most of the time, they remain folded up. Most of the time, the files are closed, not active. But when it's needed, then the file drawer goes open and the file folder is open so that the information can come out. They say it that way. So the chromosome is activated. When the cell in our pancreas gets the signal that the sugar, the glucose level is going up in the blood, then this gene is activated. The gene that tells the body to produce insulin is activated. I suppose it physically opens up in some way. But that still doesn't do the job. They have what they call molecules that are called RNA molecules. RNA messenger molecule. When the gene is opened up, when it is activated, an RNA messenger molecule will come and place itself next to the gene so that it reads the message of the gene. Then it leaves the nucleus. The nucleus is also surrounded by a double membrane. It leaves the nucleus and it travels to the endoplasmic reticulum, which is kind of like a little fabric, a little factory. Like a little factory. It's a little factory where insulin is produced. It travels over here and it goes into this reticulum. It's a little tiny organ that is about half of a micron wide and about 5 microns long. Not very big, but it's a very, very efficient little factory. And so it goes in there, and when it gets in there, it stops, and then there are all kinds of, well, we should talk about amino acids. There are a number of kinds of amino acids, but there are 20 of them that are very common. The most common ones are 20 of them. The body uses protein of different kinds. And what a protein is a chain of amino acids. There are many different kinds of protein, but the differences are the order of the amino acids, the order of the amino acid chain. So what is going to happen now is that to produce insulin is a protein. Insulin is a hormone, and the body is getting ready to produce insulin. But what it's going to do now, it's going to put these amino acids in sequence. They have to go in the right order. If they're not in the right order, it's not going to be insulin, it'll be something else. So what this RNA messenger that comes from the nucleus is going to do is going to tell the reticulum the order of amino acids that are needed to produce insulin. Going to tell what order they're in. They form a chain. And so it stops there. And as it does so, then there are the amino acids in the surrounding cytoplasm are there, and each one is attached to a carrier. These carriers will come and attach themselves to the RNA messenger in the order so that if it says here like A or B or C, let's just give them letters. Type A, type C, type B, type D, type F, type A, type 1. So there are a sequence of different types of amino acids. And this RNA messenger comes with this message, and with each of these positions along the chain of the RNA messenger, will have the code for a different type of amino acid. And the messenger is telling it the order of these different types of amino acids. And so here's the amino acid, this one, this one, this one. And they come and they attach themselves to this messenger. And the messenger comes, and then within the little factory, there are some other molecules called ribosomes. The ribosomes are the workers in the factory. They're the employees. And what they do is they come along and they begin at one end of the chain and they go along taking off the amino acid chain and adding them. They go along. The RNA messenger has already told it what order these are supposed to be in. But they go along and taking them off. They go along taking them off, taking them off, taking them off, taking them off as it goes along the chain, each one. And they're going to be in the right order. How are they going to be in the right order? Because the RNA messenger has told it what order it's supposed to be in. The RNA messenger has made it clear the order that it's need to be in order to form insulin. We're trying to make insulin. So this RNA messenger, and as it comes along, then the carrier that had that type of amino acid in it drops off, and another one comes back. And so long behind it comes another ribosome forming, and as they're going along, this is kind of an assembly line. So the ribosomes are forming amino acid chains. When it comes to the end of the chain, you have a perfect chain in exactly the right order to form insulin. And the chain is together, and it goes through some processes that are beyond us to be able to describe or understand. But it pretty soon is independent, and there is a molecule of insulin. Another one comes along behind it, another one comes along behind it, and this consequently is going on and on and on. If this happens, we're describing it in a way that takes a little while to describe it. But it's not happening that slow. It's happening very fast. Why? Because an emergency. Because we ate so much sugar. And our body is about to collapse if we don't get the sugar taken care of. And so an emergency is happening. And the body is producing millions. Because it's happening in different cells. It's happening all over the body. Our body is producing millions of molecules of insulin. In a fairly short time, this takes place. Thank God. Huh? Otherwise, we would die. Because our body can't take that. See? And then these go out into the cytoplasm. And the cell wall allows them to go out into the bloodstream. They get into our bloodstream. And they go to the cells. And they say to the cells, open up, take in some glucose. And the cell begins to absorb glucose. Because, why? Because the insulin has told them to do so. Does it sound complicated? Of course, it's complicated. It's very complicated. What are we talking about? We're talking about cells. The tiniest, the smallest thing there is. Charles Darwin, what do you think? If you could be alive today, if you could know how the cell works, if you could know how the function of the body works, even in the smallest detail, would you still believe that everything came out about by evolution? Do you think that would be possible to believe that? Do you think that these one-celled animals, now I've been talking about a cell in the pancreas of a human being, although all mammals have pancreases. I'm talking about how insulin is produced. But you could go on endlessly. You could go on for days. And the biochemists do this. I'm sure there probably may be some biochemist here today that could maybe set us straight and give us a lot more instruction about all of this. All these things happen. So amazing, so awe-inspiring. We have an awesome God. A God who could make these things, a God who could think them up, a God who designed us, a God who formed us. You see, we talked about last time how prophecy shows the truth of what the church teaches about the end time. Prophecy and science together show that what the Bible teaches about the beginning was also true. It's also true. It may be possible to believe that some degree of change comes about in animals over time because of natural consequences, because the weak die and the strong survive, because those who are more apt are the ones who are going to survive. That's I think that principle, of course, is true. But to believe that that is an adequate explanation for how things began, for how the tiny cells could have such complexity, could have such wonderful functioning, could do such marvelous things. Our bodies, David said it very well. It's in Psalm 139, verses 14 and 15. We read it for the reading this morning. He's fearfully and wonderfully made. Let's see if I can find it here. We'll read it again. Psalms, he said, for I will praise thee. Verse 14, Psalm 139, 14. I will praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. I don't suppose David knew much about cell metabolism. He didn't know much about insulin. Maybe he didn't know, but he could see enough. He could see how the eyes worked and how our muscles work and our intelligence works. And he could see that the human body is an awesome thing. It is made by an awesome God. We can believe. It's not a dumb thing to have faith. It's an intelligent thing to have faith. It's an intelligent person. The more you study, the more you learn, the more you believe. The more you can believe, the stronger can be your faith. You don't need to believe because your parents told you or because somebody else said. You can believe because it's intellectually satisfying. Not only because it makes us feel happy, it makes us feel peaceful and all of that when we pray. That's good. That's wonderful. It should be that way. The Sabbath is a blessing. Going to church is a blessing. Reading the Bible is a blessing. Praying is a blessing. That's good because it makes us happy. All these things are good. But we can also believe because our intellect tells us so. Because it's the reasonable thing to do. God has blessed us with knowledge nowadays that the world didn't have in the past. And it might be possible to believe in some amount of biological change due to the principle that Darwin discovered of natural selection. It might be that the iguanas on the Galapagos Island were adapted in somehow over time to their environment. Those things are possible. But to believe, to take that and to go from there and to say that everything we see around us, the birds, the fish, the microscopic animals, photosynthesis, all of these wonderful things that we see around us in the scientific world, to believe that all of that is a consequence of natural selection? No, there's just no way. That's not an intelligent response. Not an intelligent response. We could go into a lot of other aspects of biological science that help us understand the way God works and how awesome it is. But God has left us his fingerprint in nature. He's left us his evidences that can appeal to our senses, our sense of beauty, our sense of joy, our sense of love. And he has said, here, look, see what I have done. See what an awesome God I am. And we can give him our lives in devotion. You know, all of this that I've talked about this morning helps us to believe in God. I want to mention another aspect of it, another aspect of what I've said this morning. And that is, sometimes we measure, it's not exactly related to what I talked about already, but we measure what we're going to eat according to what tastes good. We need to think also of what this is doing to our body. We need to think also how we can exhaust the possibility if we constantly, because of modern methods of food preparation, they have learned to concentrate sugar in huge amounts. So if we're eating or breakfast cereal with sugar, we put sugar on our this and that. We eat lots of sweets and lots of candy and soda. And we expect our pancreas to rescue us every time. But as time goes by, it gives up. It becomes sick. After being overtaxed, after being overburdened over a number of years, it can give up. And the cells begin to become insulin resistant. And diabetes is not any fun. And there is a great epidemic of diabetes going on right now. And Hidalgo County is one of the centers of the whole United States where the epidemic of diabetes is the worst. We need to think about these things. We need to follow principles of healthful living and be very careful in what we eat and drink and how we use our bodies, because God expects us to be good stewards of what He has given us. He expects us to respect the temple that He has created. He wants us. I'm not saying that everybody that has diabetes is because of that, because of use, because there are other reasons. There are other reasons. But by God's grace, we can be careful. We can follow principles of health. And we can live healthfully our whole lives by God's grace. That's another aspect of what we talked about. Because the constant abuse of what God has provided for us can lead to bad consequences in our lives. So I believe that we can have faith, strong faith, that what God has predicted about the future is going to happen. Because prophecy has fulfilled in the past, and we know that what's going to happen in the future is going to happen. And we can also have strong faith that what the Bible says about origins, how the world began, how it started in God's plan. We can also have strong faith in that, because God is a creator God, and He's a coming King, and He will soon come. And we're going to be in heaven with Him forever by His grace. Let us, by His grace, make plans through faith in Him to be ready on that day. May God bless each of us.